Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Control.
Go.
Telcom.
Go.
GNC.
Go.
Ecom.
Go.
Surgeon.
Go.
Capcom, we're go for landing.
Eagle, Houston, you're a go for landing. Over.
At 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 42 seconds after noon Eastern Time on July 20th, 1969.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
2 men from planet Earth landed on Earth's moon, nearly 220,000 miles from home.
The surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder.
Like Newton, they stood on the backs of giants when they stood on the lightly tugging moon.
75 feet.
Those who had sent them there and worried over the consoles at Mission Control in Houston, Texas, endured some heart-stopping and some inspiring moments.
They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes.
The Apollo 11 mission was a coda in a long symphony of dream and desire that stirred when mankind first looked up and out. And I'm Reed Collins in Washington. This is the 25th anniversary of that first landing on the moon. 2 people who had been essential to the success of that mission are with us now from Houston, Texas. Christopher Columbus Kraft was the director of flight operations during Apollo 11. And by the time of the moonwalk, he already was a success at NASA and a known figure nationally. In August of 1965, Time magazine put him on the cover, profiling his work as the flight director for the Mercury missions and some of the Geminis. Eugene Kranz was the flight director of Apollo 11, the man who guided Neil Armstrong through the last few miles of his journey. In fact, was the flight director and the mission operations director for a long time since. He just left the program. Mr. Kranz, while we've got you, let me ask you, first of all, congratulations on making it through 25 tough years. But let me ask you, what did you think in '61 when you heard that young president suggest that we would meet the challenge and be on the moon before the decade ended?
We were really struggling to get man in orbit in Project Mercury. And one side of me said, my God, this guy doesn't understand the technical challenges involved. The other side of me said, thank God we got such a clear sense of leadership and direction to the future.
Dr. Kraft, where were you and what did you think?
Well, I'm sure I was at Cape Canaveral.
Yeah.
That's where I spent most of my time in those days. But I kind of thought he'd gone daft, if you want my frank opinion. I thought it was too far for us to jump, recognizing the problems that I had at the time. It didn't take me long to get over that. It didn't take me long to become dedicated to getting the job done that he'd asked us to do. But on that particular day when he said that, I must say, I was pretty taken aback.
But it was you who developed the trench, the console, the organization ideas for all of us in Mercury. We used to go out and talk to you outside of the Holiday Inn and places. There were no big press conferences. It was a smaller operation then. Did it become unwieldy, do you think?
No, I think that in flight operations, I think Gene would say the same thing. It always came down to us to do. We knew in the end we were going to get the job, and we had to go do it regardless of the haggling, regardless of the engineering problems, regardless of what people had to say about it. We were the ones that eventually were going to have to go do it. So no, I don't ever remember being worried too much about the haggling. When I got into management, I certainly did, but I tried to keep that off this guy on my right.
Well, Gene Kranz, was there really a concern when you had that program alarm going off when the lunar lander was just about to touch down? What did you think?
Well, I was concerned that the controllers would get distracted from the other systems. I think there were times throughout the entire descent phase when it got sort of dicey, but the operating team had worked under pressure in previous flights. We had been well trained, and that was our job, get Neil and Buzz down on the moon.
The voice we hear all the time is Charlie Duke. He and John Young were going to do their own Tang commercial on the moon later, weren't they? But at any rate, that's another story for another time. I want to ask you, would you have, at that time, when the program alarms were going off, would you have punched up out of there? Would you have told the men to punch the ascent engine and get off the lunar surface?
Negative. The basic procedures that we would use for those program alarms was to assure that the computer was still performing the guidance functions, the navigation functions, the display functions. So really, we were looking for secondary cues that said the computer was running out of gas. We didn't see any, and Steve Bales gave me the go to continue, and we passed it on to the crew.
There's not much doubt in your mind then?
No, sir.
All right, Dr. Kraft, you had to go through some tragedy along with the triumphs. There was the Apollo Saturn 201 fire. 3 astronauts lost their lives. It proved something, didn't it, truly?
The death of those 3 astronauts was certainly something that had a great impact on all of us. We were very upset about that. We blamed all of us blamed ourselves for letting that happen. But I think it brought about a resolve in all of us that made us capable of getting the job done. It gave us some time to correct the faults in the vehicles that we were building, to build in the lessons learned from Mercury and Gemini that we had not been able to do up to that time. And I think without that hiatus, we may not have landed men on the moon in the 60s. It gave us a time to correct all those many things that we thought had to be done. And I think it caused the people to work that much harder to get the job done and give up the petty differences in what we were having at that time.
Let me tell you that at the funeral for Ed White up at West Point, the ice was booming down in the Hudson and the choir sang the corps. It was hard to take, but there was a young major there named James White. A couple of months after the Apollo landed, he would go missing in an F-105 out of Takli in Thailand over Laos. Major White is still out there, as far as anybody knows. That was going on. The war was going on. Life magazine published at the same time the pictures of 242 men who died in 1 week in Vietnam. Is that why the world, sort of the United States anyway, departed? Part of it went to Woodstock, part of it went to the moon. Is that why we don't have a cohesive national concept of what we're doing?
It's hard for me to answer that. I'm a space cadet, and worrying about those kind of things is difficult for me to give answers to. All I can say is I think that space still has a part to play in the solution of our everyday problems down here on the Earth, and that's the way it ought to be looked at. NASA needs to be challenged to say, okay, what are you going to do to help us solve these problems down here? That will lead, in my opinion, to the next steps in space exploration because it'll provide us the vehicles to do it with.
Right, Gene Kranz, you once said of Neil Armstrong, he wanted to do something rather than to be something, and he did it. Is that part of America's current obsession to be something without doing anything? Just do it?
Well, I think that was a characteristic that I saw not only in Neil, but virtually all of the people that worked in mission operations at the time of the lunar program, and even today. I believe that if we can focus on our objectives rather than ourselves, we can solve many, certainly technical problems and possibly many of the social problems. So I think the theme that we developed there, I think, is essential for everybody for everyday life.
All right, both of you, we want to thank you for your time on this auspicious day. We want to congratulate you on the moment, and we want to thank you for what you helped to do. You, too, stood on the shoulders of giants, and you were also giants. Thanks, Dr. Chris Kraft, Director of Flight Operations during Apollo 11. Then he went on to become the director of the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. He now is a consultant to Rockwell International, IBM, and a number of other firms, too. And thanks to Eugene Kranz, he was the flight director of Apollo 11. He went on and directed many other missions, served NASA, in fact, for 33 years until his retirement just this year. Again, thanks to you both. I'm Reed Collins in Washington.
On the moon, July 1969, it came in peace for all mankind.